In the 60s and 70s, Keith Richards, the legendary guitarist of the Rolling Stones, was as famous for his wild lifestyle as he was for his groundbreaking music. With a string of romantic entanglements, run-ins with the law, and notorious substance abuse, Richards became a symbol of rock and roll excess. But behind the headlines and scandalous stories, there's a story of resilience and transformation. In this video, we'll explore how Keith Richards faced the chaos he created, overcame his personal struggles, and emerged stronger, both as an artist and a person, leaving a lasting legacy in the music world. Keith Richards' life is a vivid and often chaotic tapestry, interwoven with remarkable moments of survival, personal struggles, and profound musical influence. His existence has been punctuated by a series of life-threatening events, many of which defy reason and cast him as a symbol of human endurance and, in some cases, luck. His survival, often deemed miraculous, has been a topic of fascination for fans and critics alike, given that many of these incidents seemed destined to end his life at an early age. Yet Keith Richards, despite the odds, not only lived to tell his tale, but continued to shape rock history. The early years, survival in the shadow of war. Born in 1943, during the height of World War II, Keith Richards' life was marked by danger from the very beginning. In 1944, at just a year old, he faced one of the first harrowing brushes with death that would define his life's narrative. As a child, he lived in the heart of London during the infamous bombings that scarred the city's skyline. It was during these bombings that a V-1 flying bomb, an aerial weapon deployed by Nazi Germany, struck nearby, sending shockwaves throughout the area. Miraculously, baby Keith, who was lying in his cot, narrowly escaped death when his mother, fearing the imminent danger, evacuated their home just in time. While many of their neighbors perished in the attack, Keith's survival marked a twist of fate that would echo throughout the rest of his life. This early close call with death set the tone for the countless other precarious moments that would unfold in Keith's life. Moments that would often seem more fitting for a rock and roll myth than the reality of human existence. A shocking performance. The first brush with mortality fast. Forward to 1965. And Richards was already a budding star with the Rolling Stones, a band that was beginning to reshape the landscape of rock music. However, the stage, which would later become Richards' domain for decades, became an arena of peril in one of his first major encounters with danger. During a live performance, Richards received an electric shock from his microphone, an accident that knocked him unconscious and burned the strings of his guitar. This event served as a shocking reminder of how close Richards came to being taken by the very thing he loved, music. The incident foreshadowed the tumultuous and often dangerous path that lay ahead for him, a path that would be defined as much by his recklessness as by his genius. Despite the close call, Richards shrugged it off, continuing to perform as the iconic guitar god he became known as. But this was only the beginning of a series of near-death encounters that would mark his career in music. The 1970s, the fire and the fall. The 1970s were a decade defined by excess, both musically and personally, for Keith Richards and the Rolling Stones. Amidst the frenzy of world tours, the band's meteoric rise, and the cultural shift of the era, Richards' personal life became embroiled in chaos. It was during this time that he experienced several life-threatening events that seemed almost predestined, as though fate was taunting him to push the limits further. In 1971, one of the more bizarre near-death incidents occurred. While Richards was dozing off, a lit cigarette in his hand sparked a fire that engulfed his bed. As the flames began to spread, Richards' girlfriend at the time, Anita Pallenberg, was luckily able to escape unscathed. But the fire left Richards shaken. The near catastrophe was a reminder of the fragility of life, even for someone who lived on the edge as Keith did. Just a couple of years later, in 1973, another fire broke out at Richards' infamous Redlands estate. Though Richards attributed the blaze to a wire-chewing mouse, a somewhat comical yet eerie excuse, the proximity of the flames to his home was too close for comfort. Fire had become an unwelcome companion in his life, both literally and metaphorically. It represented the dangers that would constantly loom over him, threatening to consume everything in his chaotic world. The dark side of fame, struggling with addiction. While fire seemed to be a recurring motif in Richards's life, the 1970s also brought him face to face with the more sinister side of fame, drugs. As the counterculture movement spread like wildfire, so did the abuse of illegal substances. Richards became entrenched in the drug culture, particularly heroin, which was synonymous with the rock and roll lifestyle at the time. Yet it was not just any form of substance abuse. It was the dangerous cocktail of addiction, celebrity, and personal demons that threatened to unravel Richards's career and life. In the early 1970s, Richards' heroin use became legendary. He was often seen as the embodiment of the drug culture, and his hedonistic lifestyle seemed to spiral out of control. In fact, his involvement with heroin led to several legal run-ins, including an infamous 1977 drug bust in Canada that could have landed him in prison for years. Yet, despite the severe consequences that loomed large, Richards continued his descent into addiction, almost as if he had accepted the inevitable. However, in 1978, Richards reached a pivotal crossroads. With the very real possibility of facing long-term imprisonment looming, he made a conscious decision to quit heroin. It was a moment of reckoning that allowed him to reassess his life and recognize the toll his lifestyle had taken. This decision marked the beginning of his struggle for redemption, though it would take many more years and a host of additional brushes with death before he truly turned the corner. A fall from grace, the 1998 library incident. While Richards' life remained a constant series of ups and downs, a particularly jarring event occurred in 1998. Richards was at his home in Connecticut, reaching for a book in his library when disaster struck. A heavy stack of volumes fell on top of him, breaking several of his ribs. The seemingly mundane act of grabbing a book turned into a life-threatening situation that served as a stark reminder of the fragility of life. The injury, though not immediately fatal, left Richards with a painful reminder that he was not invincible. The fact that a moment as innocent as picking up a book could lead to such consequences was a sobering realization for the rock star. This injury was one of the more ironic twists in Richards' life, as it underscored the absurdity of life and death. Here was a man who had survived bombings, fires, and overdoses, yet something as simple as reaching for a book became one of his greatest threats. A tribute to his father. In the midst of all the chaos and turbulence, there was one moment that highlighted the depth of Richards's personal journey, a moment that revealed the complexity of his character. The infamous tale of Richards snorting his father's ashes became one of the most bizarre and unforgettable anecdotes in rock and roll lore. Richards claimed that his father, Herbert, would have found the act perfectly fitting given their unorthodox relationship. After decades of estrangement, Richards reconciled with his father in the early 1980s, and by the time of Herbert's death, the two had formed an unexpected bond. It was this relationship that made the strange act of snorting his father's ashes seem oddly fitting, a symbolic gesture of the unconventional connection between the two. The Boy Scout and Choir Boy. Early years of paradox. Despite the chaotic rock star persona that Richards would come to embody, his early years were marked by surprising contrasts. As a boy, Richards was not just rebellious, he was also a choir boy and a Boy Scout. Experiences that seem worlds apart from the wild lifestyle he later embraced. As a choir boy, Richards even performed for Queen Elizabeth II at Westminster Abbey, an experience that would leave an indelible mark on his musical career. Richards' time as a Boy Scout, which saw him lead a beaver patrol, taught him leadership and teamwork, skills that would later serve him well as the Rolling Stones leader. Yet, even in these early years, his rebellious nature emerged, leading to his eventual discharge after engaging in a fight. It was clear even then that Richards was destined for a life that defied convention, the Rolling Stones and the turbulent relationship with Mick Jagger. The history of the Rolling Stones is inseparable from the partnership of Mick Jagger and Keith Richards. Known as the Glimmer Twins, their collaboration produced some of the most iconic music in rock history. However, their relationship was not without its share of conflicts. The 1980s saw tensions arise, particularly when Jagger pursued his own solo endeavors, including the release of his solo album in 1985. Richards resented Jagger's decision, and the resulting rift plunged the band into what Richards referred to as World War III. For a time, it seemed as though the Rolling Stones might disband. Despite the tension, the bond between Jagger and Richards endured, and they eventually reconciled, continuing to make music together for decades. The Rolling Stones' ability to withstand their internal conflicts and the strength of their partnership serves as a testament to both Richards and Jagger's resilience, as well as their shared commitment to the music they created together. Keith Richards and Mick Jagger's relationship is often cited as one of the most complex and tumultuous dynamics in rock and roll history. Their partnership, which has spanned decades, was the backbone of the Rolling Stones, producing some of the most iconic music in the genre. However, behind the music, their personal relationship has been anything but smooth, marked by periods of intense conflict, estrangement, and reconciliation. The reconciliation in 1989 was one of the pivotal moments in the Rolling Stones' history, rescuing the band from the brink of dissolution. However, despite this truce, their relationship was far from perfect, and tensions between the two would persist, resurfacing in public feuds and private criticisms for years to come. The 1989 reconciliation, a fragile truce. The Rolling Stones, by the late 1980s, had already solidified their place as one of the most successful and influential rock bands of all time. However, the band's internal dynamics were beginning to unravel, particularly between Jagger and Richards. The two had always been the creative forces behind the group, but by the mid-1880s, they were often at odds over the direction of the band and their personal differences. Mick Jagger's increasingly dominant role, both in terms of decision-making and his growing solo ambitions, created friction with Richards, who felt increasingly sidelined. In 1985, Jagger released his first solo album, She's the Boss, a move that was seen by many, including Richards, as a betrayal. Richards, known for his rebellious nature and his fierce loyalty to the Rolling Stones, felt Jagger was undermining the band's unity. Jagger, on the other hand, was seeking to explore his own creative path outside the Stones' traditional framework. The tension reached a boiling point, and Richards openly criticized Jagger's solo career, leading to a rift that seemed irreparable at the time. However, in 1989, after several years of public insults, personal estrangement, and the real possibility of the Rolling Stones breaking up, Richards and Jagger managed to reconcile. This moment marked a crucial turning point for the band, allowing them to return to the studio and continue making music together. The truce, however, was a fragile one, held together by the shared understanding that the Rolling Stones could not exist without their dynamic partnership. Their reconciliation was the result of a series of private talks and compromises, but the underlying tensions were far from resolved. Despite the apparent peace, their relationship remained strained, with unresolved issues lingering beneath the surface. Richards' memoir, a tragic reflection of their relationship. Keith Richards' 2010 memoir, Life, provides an unfiltered look at the complexities of his relationship with Mick Jagger. Richards, never one to shy away from controversy, painted a stark picture of the distance that had grown between them over the years. In the book, Richards revealed that he hadn't visited Jagger's dressing room in decades, a telling admission that underscored how emotionally distant the two had become. What had once been a close friendship based on mutual respect and a shared love for music had devolved into something more akin to business partners who tolerated each other out of necessity. Richards described Jagger during the 1980s as increasingly unbearable, noting that his ego had ballooned and he had become difficult to work with. This characterization of Jagger was more than just a passing criticism. It revealed a deeper frustration on Richards' part. He felt that Jagger, who had always been the more polished and commercially minded member of the band, had become consumed with his own celebrity and success, pushing aside the creative partnership that had once defined their relationship. The publication of Life was seen as a cathartic moment for Richards, a chance to finally air his grievances with Jagger and the Rolling Stones' often tumultuous history. Richards did not hold back in his memoir, detailing how their relationship had deteriorated and how Jagger's increasing focus on his solo career and personal fame had affected the band's dynamic. The book also reflected Richards' sense of betrayal and the pain he felt over their fracturing bond. Yet, despite the bitterness, there was also an underlying sense of nostalgia for their earlier years when the two had been inseparable, sharing creative visions and experiences that defined the Rolling Stones. The Rolling Stones' hidden criticisms, Brenda and Her Majesty. The tension between Richards and Jagger was not just something confined to private conversations or memoirs. It found its way into the Rolling Stones' internal culture, with the band members developing a covert language to express their frustrations with Jagger while he remained oblivious. In a remarkable display of passive-aggressive humor, the band members began referring to Jagger as Brenda or Her Majesty, mocking his increasingly diva-like behavior and his self-importance. The use of these names became an inside joke within the band, a way to vent their frustrations without Jagger catching on. Brenda was a particularly cutting nickname used to describe Jagger's feminine, effeminate qualities and his perceived narcissism. Meanwhile, Her Majesty was a jab at Jagger's growing sense of royalty and entitlement, as if he saw himself as the central figure in the Stones empire above the others. These nicknames allowed the band to express their grievances about Jagger's behavior, while he remained blissfully unaware of their criticisms. It was a reflection of the deepening divide between Richards and Jagger, as well as the band's increasing frustration with Jagger's dominance within the group. Despite the tension, the Rolling Stones were professionals, and they continued to perform together, albeit with a sense of underlying resentment. The public faced a united front, but behind the scenes, there was a growing sense of alienation among the band members, especially Richards, who felt betrayed by Jagger's behavior and decisions. Keith Richards and Tom Waits, a musical collaboration of deep bonds. While Richards' relationship with Jagger was fraught with tension, his friendship with singer-songwriter Tom Waits provided a stark contrast. Richards and Waits share a deep and profound musical bond that transcended the traditional rock and roll scene. Their relationship dates back to the mid-1880s when Richards contributed to Waits' 1985 album, Rain Dogs. This collaboration marked the beginning of a long-standing friendship that would see the two musicians work together on several projects. In 2013, the duo recorded a unique version of the sea shanty Shenandoah, which showcased the rich musical connection between them. Richards, known for his guitar prowess, lent his talents to several tracks on Waits' albums, adding his distinctive sound to Waits' avant-garde, gravelly music. Their collaborations were often marked by mutual respect and admiration, and Richards spoke highly of Waits' musical abilities and creativity. Despite their close bond, their collaborative efforts were not without challenges. According to Ultimate Classic Rock, Waits held Richards in high regard, but acknowledged that their dynamics sometimes required an adult in the room. This remark stemmed from Richards' often unpredictable and demanding personality. The two attempted to co-write songs for Waits' 2011 album, Bad As Me. But the process was less about structured songwriting and more about improvisation. Richards, in his usual irreverent manner, would often exclaim, "Scribe," after improvising a piece of music, expecting Waits to transcribe it. Eventually, Richards' unspoken demand became clear. He wanted Waits to do the work of transcribing their spontaneous creations. Despite Richards' significant contribution to the album, he did not receive co-writing credits, though he did lend his guitar skills to several tracks. Waits, in a nod to their friendship, referenced both Richards and Jagger in the lead single Satisfied, underscoring the mutual respect and playful camaraderie between the two. This collaboration was marked by a spirit of mutual respect, even if their working relationship occasionally had its challenges. Keith Richards, an unlikely fashion icon. Keith Richards is often seen as a quintessential rock and roll icon, known for his wild, untamed persona and his flamboyant sense of style. However, contrary to the image of a meticulously curated rock star wardrobe, Richards' fashion sense was born more out of necessity and convenience than careful design. His wardrobe choices, while distinctive, were often borrowed from the women in his life, particularly his daughters and his wife, Patty Hansen. Richards openly admitted in 2016 that most of his clothes were borrowed from his family, revealing an unconventional approach to fashion. He explained that he never intentionally set out to make a fashion statement, but simply found certain pieces of clothing to be appealing. His daughter Alexandra has said that her father had an uncanny ability to wear anything, even pajama pants, and make it look effortlessly stylish. This laid-back approach to fashion defied traditional gender norms, as Richards would often raid his wife's closet for scarves, jackets, and even skirts, making no distinction between men's and women's clothing. Despite his unorthodox approach, Richards became a fashion icon in his own right. His loud jackets, scarves, and eclectic accessories became symbols of his rock star persona. However, this seemingly carefree approach to fashion would lead to legal trouble in the 1970s. During this time, Richards and the Rolling Stones frequently wore matching jackets, often passing them around between band members. One day, Richards unknowingly borrowed a jacket that contained hidden pockets with illicit substances. This led to an arrest and a legal battle, with Richards having to take responsibility for substances he didn't even know were in his borrowed attire. This incident highlighted the chaotic and sometimes dangerous nature of Richards' life, where even something as simple as borrowing clothes could lead to unexpected consequences. 6. Keith Richards, the intellectual rocker. Beyond the wild rock and roll image, Keith Richards is also a voracious reader, something that might surprise many of his fans. Despite his public persona, Richards has always had a deep love for literature, and his homes in both the US and the UK are filled with thousands of books. Richards grew up in a poor neighbourhood in London, and the local library became an early escape for him. He often speaks about how the library served as a great equalizer in his youth, offering him access to knowledge and stories that were otherwise unavailable to him. His extensive book collection includes works from a wide range of genres, from classic literature to biographies, and he has said that he enjoys lending out books to friends and guests. In a whimsical touch, Richards once entertained the idea of organizing his library according to the Dewey Decimal System, though he ultimately abandoned the idea due to the impracticality of the task. Despite the chaos of his rock and roll life, Richards' love for reading provided him with a quiet retreat from the madness. Keith Richards' life has been defined by its contradictions. The wild, untamed rock and roll icon who consistently defied authority, the audacious figure who embraced trouble and rebellion at every turn. This was a man whose very essence seemed to embody anti-establishment sentiments, forging his own path in a world that often tried to tame his untamable spirit. From his love of chaos to his devotion to musical artistry, Richards found ways to bring the two together in ways few could understand. His passion for trouble was mirrored in his lifestyle, one that veered from the conventional at every turn, and in many ways, it was this same spirit that helped shape the legendary music he created. The story of Keith Richards is not just the tale of a rock star. It is the story of a man who sought rebellion in every corner of his existence, from his purchases to his creative endeavors, and even to the moments of chaos that arose unexpectedly.